and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha, and I'm an entrepreneur, a longtime meditator, and a student of Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the tools and practices to help you integrate your whole self into every aspect of your world. As someone who is both a type A high achiever and a deeply spiritual, vulnerable, and empathetic being, I know firsthand how it feels to be living a double life, showing up one way at work, a different way alone, and struggling to reconcile the two. This disintegration of authenticity is one of the biggest causes of burnout, health flares, and anxiety. For me, understanding how the mind-body connection is crucial to health and success, cultivating a strong sense of inner self, and applying the healing philosophies of Chinese medicine and Zen Buddhism to my life has allowed me to lead from a completely heart-powered place, letting go of other people's judgments and finding peace in allowing my multidimensional being to shine. My hope is that this podcast may inspire you to do the same. I want to call out, it is a practice, it is a journey, but I believe it is the most important thing that we can do for our bodies, minds, and our ultimate potential. Enjoy. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the pod. Today, I am so pumped to share with you a very special guest. I am speaking with the incredible Judy Lieblein. Judy is an herbalist, Reiki master, teacher, visionary activist, co-owner and on-staff herbalist at Gathering Time, and owner of Sacred Rose Herbals. Judy is also a shamanic practitioner, and that is what we're going to be diving into today. I had the good fortune of meeting with Judy several times, but most recently for an energy healing session where we went through my experience of a shamanic death, which is what was happening in real time at the time. I'm going to get into that on today's episode. And today we really explore a spiritual system, lineage, and path that is fairly new to me. And that is shamanism. Some of you might be aware of the word itself, but not really familiar with what it means. Who is a shaman? What is a shamanic practitioner? How does that differ from a shaman? Talk about the different experiences that one may go through. May it be a fragmentation, a shamanic death, a initiation process, which is what Judy had gone through in the past. We're going to also talk about plant medicine and the use of plant medicine in the shamanic tradition and really dive into a lot of the reverence and the rituals associated with using plant medicine in this way, but also talk about some of the disconnect and what has been lost in our culture as this rise and awareness of psychedelics has really kind of pulsed through the world. And I think this is a really important conversation because, as Judy and I discussed right after the recording, there's been this surge in the popularity and the availability of psychedelic medicine, plant medicine. But I think it's important to also be aware of the sacred reverence of the plant itself and what misuse looks like, what overuse looks like, and what are some of the not just benefits, which we are of course very well aware of, but what are some of the risks of misusing the medicine itself? Overuse, improper use, using under the wrong set and setting, intention, harvesting. This is going to be quite the deep dive for anyone who is curious about psychedelics. This is a must listen. And for anyone who wants to dive deeper into understanding shamanism and shamanic practices, this is going to be an incredible intro. Without further ado, let's welcome the incredible Judy Lieblein to the podcast. Welcome, Judy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is such an honor. As I was saying right before we started recording, I feel like this conversation is going to go and already feels so much deeper than what I had kind of imagined our potential conversation topics to be, because just a couple of weeks ago, I actually experienced some of the healing work. Would that be fair to say? Healing work that you do? Yeah. So I feel like I'm coming at it from a different perspective, because from the moment that I met you, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to this incredible human being on the podcast. And then now I'm like, all right, I have like a whole different point of view from which we can share. And I'm so pumped about it. So thank you for joining me. Before we jump into things, I want to start with a question that I ask everybody. And that is, what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
So this can change day to day, but in this moment, I'd say solutionarian, adventurer, and seer.
Wow. What was the first one?
Solutionarian. Like I'm always working to come up with solutions for whatever presents, either on a local level, collective level, global. I'm just wired that way to look for answers.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was the first time I've heard that one. And it's such a unique combination to have seer, which is, I think, kind of, well, I know you, but like into seer of many realms combined with solutionarian. That's so rare. I like it. Wow. And I like that that's what's coming up for you now. And for me, having gotten to know you a bit better, that definitely resonates. I'm like, okay, yeah. I can see that. And since you are an herbalist, I'm going to throw a question out there that I don't ask everybody. And that is, if you were a plant, what would you be? And does that change? Is that stagnant too? I'm curious.
No, that's fluid as well. But I'm feeling like mugwort. And, it's a native plant all through California. But it holds both lunar and solar qualities and helps people to go into the dream time. It's a great medicine as an oil for cramping, and it's soothing and relaxing and eases deep tension. So I'm kind of vibing with the mugwort.
I love that. Also very appropriate from, at least on the receiving end, what I have seen of you. So I feel like I've been teasing this, and I probably have talked about it in the intro, but Judy, you're an herbalist, you're a shamanic practitioner, Reiki master, teacher, visionary activist, co-owner, and on-staff herbalist at Gathering Time, and you're the owner of Sacred Rose Herbals. And there's a lot right there that we could cover. But the topic that I really want to dive into today, partially because I feel like we touched some of this together when we did our work together, is shamanism. And so I feel like this is a topic where there are just a lot of misconceptions, a lot of unknowns. When you hear the word shamanic practitioner, shaman, shamanism as a whole, there's just so much that can be interpreted there. So could you start by sharing with us what exactly is shamanism?
Oh, so I'm going to give like just a really broad, general, definition of it from how I know it and how I've studied it. So in many indigenous tribal cultures, they'd have a shaman within the tribe. And the shaman would be a medicine man or medicine woman, and they were called to do this work at a very young age. They went through years and years of training in order to look into different realms, work with different spirits in order to provide healing for anyone who came to them with any issue, physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. So I don't consider myself a shaman. I wouldn't use that word as I'm not indigenous. So a shamanic practitioner, more what I've studied. I was called into this, and I went through an initiatory illness where I received like psychic gifts and things like that, which led me to this path. And then I studied with some indigenous medicine people to learn. And then it's just kind of incorporated into what I do.
Would shamanism also be considered a religion, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's looked at as a religion and or spiritual practice. And I think the definition of it has changed through time. And I think one of the reasons it's considered religious now is that there's certain rites that come with having a religious organization. And so to deem the plant medicine under this umbrella protects it so that people within the church or the group can use it freely. So I think but again, I didn't grow up in an indigenous environment, so I can't totally speak to that, but I think it holds both religious and spiritual.
That must have been such a powerful experience to have gone through what you describe as kind of that indoctrination in terms of the illness itself, or I don't know if there's a correct term for that, but then to also kind of be exposed to this world. Like that sounds exciting, but also a bit overwhelming to have kind of experienced that. What was your take on that?
It was scary. It was it was a couple-year process that I went through, but I actually had met a medicine person who ended up in my circle, and I described my experience, and they were like, "Oh, that's classic initiatory illness." So they gave me the framework for it and helped me understand what was happening, what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, and then how to integrate it into daily life, and then how to use those gifts going forward with other people.
So for many people, when they hear the term illness, you think like flu, COVID, right? What exactly is this illness of, quote, indoctrination? Is there another term for it? Like, what is happening? If you can just briefly explain that for a moment.
So, I mean, you can read about it, like there's books on it, but at this stage, I think any illness can be an initiatory illness. For me, mine was a little bit classic where I was unable to eat or drink for a year. I didn't sleep for almost a year. And then I had visions, and spirits would come talk to me, and I would travel out and talk to them. And so I started getting information about how the world was created and how to do different things. So the illness puts you into a place where just portals open. You kind of get blown open, and there's portals, and then you learn, and then the information kind of flows between you and what's in that other place. Some people go through that experience and never come back from it. Others can come back from it. But I've seen like these things happen with people if they have chronic pain, anything that's going to shift your consciousness into a different place so you can see the world differently.
There's something very beautiful about that, because a lot of the time when we think about the suffering that comes with pain, with illness, and there is, I think, a lot of suffering there for most people who go through any kind of illness, big or small, chronic, acute, but to also have that be under some circumstances, maybe all, I don't know, some, a kind of opening portal. I think that there's something that kind of merges in a very interesting way the perceived horrible experience with like a beautiful otherworldly experience in one. That's really profound, really profound.
And I think it becomes an and I don't like to deny what goes on in the human realm at all. Like there is physical pain, it can be awful and people suffer. And there can also be blessings that come with it. And it can depend where your mindset is. Or some days that you're going to be more into the gifts that brings. Other days you'll be more into like, I can't get out of bed. I can't eat. Like it's just really hard. So I think it's an and situation.
Yeah, that's very non-dual of you. I gotta say, it was so fascinating to me because this isn't like how we kicked off our initial meeting. I came in and I was telling you about the kind of indecision and the limbo that I was initially dealing with around major life choice. You gave me a oat straw and it cleared within a week. And then I was like, okay, there's something going on here. And I wanted to learn more about you and learn more about the work that you do. And it was interesting because your work are kind of the different practices that you incorporate into the healing work that you do. They weren't outwardly advertised, actually. Like I couldn't even read about you. So it all came via conversation, which is quite amazing that we're getting to have this now because I can go deeper into the stuff that frankly was pretty foreign. I mean, it was like a 1-2 word sentence about your background of that of a shamanic practitioner. And so I actually mentioned that because so much of, I think, the wellness world right now is talking about healing this, healing that. And there's almost like, at least in my experience, this pull of when I'm suffering with something, maybe psychosomatic or just completely emotional or physical, like all of the above, I'm always going to, maybe it's going to be this healing modality, maybe it's this therapy, maybe it's something else. And it's just kind of, there's no shortage of options as to who to go to. And I actually deeply appreciated the experience of actually seeking you out, frankly. And I'm curious, is that something that is typically common in the shamanic tradition, where in a way, there was once the sentence of like, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, that when someone is in a place of really being ready to kind of go through or process whatever's coming up and explore that from the perspective of shamanism, that is how you find somebody to support you? Or is it, because there are just so many people out there offering all sorts of different gifts that it can be hard to navigate who actually was indoctrinated, whose intentions are pure. And I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that whole thing in terms of figuring that out?
I do believe that, the people we need to meet or come to us, like the land in front of us. And so I think in regards to the shamanic, but even that even happens as an herbalist, like when people are ready, they'll appear in the store, and want to work with herbs, maybe having never worked with them before. So I think there is a lot of that. And I always tell people to just get deep with, if you can, come inside and figure out what it is that you're looking for and what it is that you want. And at different times, different modalities are going to be helpful. And I tell people you can always re-choose, and, maybe acupuncture isn't appropriate now. Maybe, cranial sacral is better. Maybe Reiki is better. Maybe lymphatic work is better. So it's really, I like people to stay fluid and actually see what works with them and what resonates. And the main thing is that the person across from you speaks a language you can understand and speaks a language that holds meaning and value to you, and where you feel seen and heard and respected and safe, and that can be in any field.
Beautifully said. So shifting gears for a second, because I kind of teased this quite a bit, but yes, I came to see you. And when I described what I was going through, which I'm happy to be very open about, but you kind of shared that you believed that what I was going through was something similar to that of a classic shamanic death, which is like completely a foreign concept to me. When I heard that, I'm like, okay, well, that's nice. Because I had come to you thinking that we're going to do some sort of a soul retrieval. I was going through, just for context, just what felt like a breaking down of a lot of the systems that I have been conditioned to work towards. So I was going through a shifting of my priorities with my career, a shifting of my identity and the amount of value that I have been putting on myself, as in I am valuable based on what I put out into the world. And that left me with this massive, massive void of, okay, I spent my entire life working towards fixing X, being, X enough of whatever that could be, physically or achievement oriented. And so I come in and you kind of start by telling me this, which sounds completely foreign. Could you start by, maybe before we dive into my specific case and we can dive deeper into that of the shamanic death, I'm curious, is a shamanic death one of different experiences that one might experience, like maybe the indoctrination being one, a soul retrieval being another? Like, what are some of those common experiences that people might show up with? If you can kind of give us a lay of the land. I don't even know if that's the accurate description, but yeah.
Well, people can show up with anything. And I don't always use those terms for what somebody's presenting. It's how the energy reads and how the energy is taking shape inside of somebody. And so, yeah, I can look at, fragmentation of spirit or of soul. We can look at disconnection, can look at influence of entities or spirits who are not embodied. We can look at, initiatory illness. So there's many things. And some people never have a shamanic death. Some people have one, some people have multiple ones. So it really depends on what their trajectory is and what their path is and how they're walking through this lifetime.
So what is a shamanic death?
So, I think one of the reasons why I was able to see this in you is because I've experienced a multitude of them and they're not comfortable. But it's basically, as you described, kind of a breaking down of belief structures, thought patterns, anything that's not true anything that's a lie, that's not true, gets broken down. And if you think of like scaffolding holding you up, and then you realize this, oh, wow, that's not true. This doesn't define who I am. And you take that off, and then you start picking apart, you deconstruct your reality. At some point, you pull up enough wood beams, the whole thing's going to come down. And then you're going to be at the bottom, and there's no way up. You're just on the bottom, and you have to rebuild. So the shamanic death takes you down to, I want to say, the core of who you are. And you have to figure out who you are without that structure in order to rebirth. I don't know if that makes sense. So it can be really scary. The void is one place. Some people can sit in that for a few minutes, a few hours, weeks, months, years.
Just a place of basically almost like a loss of identity.
Yeah, very much. It's a loss of identity.
How does that differ from the process of fragmentation, which is what I had thought I was kind of experiencing because of the feeling of like disassociation that I felt was coming up?
Mm-hmm. So when I see fragmentation in someone, it's generally there was an event that happened that caused somebody to split off from themselves. Like it was so traumatic on some level. And people may or may not be conscious of the level of trauma that they experienced. And so, like, if the soul's one piece, you see a split, or there's a fragmentation, or there's pieces of somebody out on the side, I'm going to want to bring back in, or they're going to want to, I'll have them call those pieces back in. Disassociation is more like you have left your home, you've left your body, and you're just kind of outside, up in somewhere around up in here, and that can be from shock or trauma as well, or just plain fear. So different things can happen. It can be as getting yelled at for something you did when you were 4 years old that you didn't do, and like somebody not hearing you. Like if you're telling your parent, no, I didn't do this. And they're like, yes, accusing you of something that maybe your sister or brother did. Not being heard at 4, that can be enough to fragment somebody, and they'll carry that with them through their life, and feeling like people don't hear them because of that one instance. And then sometimes people live in the past, right? They take that forward with them.
So when that is your experience, and I think most of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of our population kind of experiences some degree of that. Like I can definitely relate to that being the case. For me, it comes up, for example, I don't know, like the fear of putting out something that I create, like that just truly, if I'm creating it as part of a company, great. It's not really me. Like this isn't my heart that I'm putting out on the line, but if it's something that I ideated, that I really put my heart into, that's the hardest thing to put out there and be seen for. And so, I can kind of trace that back to perhaps an experience that happened that was really traumatic when I was younger. But where do we go from there, right? Like we're not living in that experience anymore, yet we're carrying that with us. So what does that look like? Is it a releasing? Is it a rebuilding? Is it a kind of reconstructing that memory?
It's, I think most of all, it's recognizing the pattern within us, and recognizing any pattern is 50% of the work. And that's the hardest part, to actually see the pattern play out. Once you see the pattern, it just dissolves itself. Like just time will dissolve it. And that's also, so you see the pattern, and then you understand, oh, I'm no longer that person. Like I'm actually, it's been 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. Like I'm not that person. So when the situation comes up, the same situation, so yeah, you can re-choose. So maybe before you had an idea that you wanted to, and I'm just not saying you, but like you people, you have an idea you want to put out into the world that stems from your heart, but you're afraid and you choose not to do it. You don't want to risk vulnerability. You don't want to risk rejection. The next time something emerges that comes up that you want to put out, then you actively take a step in that moment to make it happen. And maybe you don't see it all the way through, but maybe you write it down on a piece of paper and you start framing it. So we change patterning by making choices in the present.
That's really, I think, offers a level of empowerment, right? Like while not foregoing compassion and kind of acknowledging the pain that had happened. But at least it gives us something to move towards or to make a different choice today. I'm curious. It was fascinating to me because we had one session. And then at the end of it, I was like, okay, so now what? Right? Like, you're like, okay, you're going through shamanic death. What happened in the session happened. We don't have to like give a play by play. But then afterwards, I was like, okay, well, what's going to happen now? And you're like, well, you can take this herbal extract that you recommended. I'm going to send you my notes and you have passed through it. Be on your merry way, essentially. Like, that's kind of my experience of it. I am so curious, like, how does that work? Right? Like, what exactly had happened? If you can kind of walk through to the best of your ability, like what had happened, right? Because something did shift. And when I was in the room with you, I had a very, very clear experience of my body tingling I described. And it was like this level of presence as we were speaking that I hadn't experienced before. But I'm just like, what on earth happened?
That's a good question. I don't know that I know. Like, because I'm so in the moment when it's going on and I'm just so focused on like you, the person in front of me, that I kind of let go of a lot of things. And so I don't always remember what I'm saying because I'm just kind of moving. Like, so the person in front of me dictates whatever happens in the session. And the person shows me what they need or what they want. And then I'm there to help facilitate that. So I think part of, what happened was the validation of your experience, meaning like, I had been through something similar through a different vein, but like having the validation of the experience, having a name to it gives it a container, a beginning and an end. And remember you having a few realizations, and I saw light bulbs going off, and those realizations enabled you to make a shift. And so I saw you actually energetically shift out of a space into a new space. And I kind of, the way you described it, I kind of feel bad that I was like, bye, and sent you on your merry way. But
no, I liked it. Because it was like, you're good. Move on. Like now, like go into the world. And it was like kind of freeing in a way. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you can always come back and people can always come back. And I like to take time to have energy settle. And I like for people to distill their own experiences. And then if they have questions or they're unsure, that you can always, email me or come back and sit again and we can take a look. But we're constantly changing and evolving, like every second of the day. We're different than who we were 5 minutes before. And so I trust nature and I trust in people's ability to create what they want and to move towards what they want. And then at times, we need help from our friends or from somebody across from us to help, get us on the path or point out where the path is. So I think that's some of what took place, but that wouldn't have happened unless you were ready for it, for sure. So you had come in doing 99.9% of the work and just land.
Yeah.
Like you did so much work before you came. And that's generally how it is. People do a lot of work and then they come and then it's just that little bit of support to just go to the next place.
So that's actually a really good segue to the next question I had for you. When I showed up, I had said explicitly, like, I'm at my wit's end with this. Like, this experience is just totally not serving me anymore, right? This just feeling of, I guess, apathy or ungroundedness from like lack of grounding based on kind of the paradigm that I had broken down, that I was now just like meddled in, just all broken down around me. And I had said, I'm looking for anything like kind of soul retrieval, which is what I thought I needed, through to plant medicine. And I would love to get your thoughts on plant medicine because it is all the rage in like our society today. I am curious to know from a shamanic point of view, where I believe the plant medicine is served as actual medicine and there is a certain amount of ritual around that. Like, what are your thoughts on the kind of mass distribution that's happening with this medicine? And also, is it for everyone, right? Because I showed up and I was like, I'm ready to do anything here. Like, guide me. So tell me about your perspective on this.
Yeah. So I think, the plant medicines have been romanticized in our culture across the board. I think some people have the conception that they just do this once and like all their problems will be solved. That's not how the plant medicines work. But it's seductive. The plant medicines are seductive. And so I'm going to so if I talk about the traditional medicines like ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote or, psilocybin mushrooms, those that have been used traditionally. And from my understanding is that somebody has an issue, they would go to a medicine person and that medicine person would ingest something to see what's happening with this person across and then talk to the spirits and see what they can do. And then maybe if the spirits say, yes, this person needs to take this as well, then that person would guide them through it. What I see today is I see a lot of people flying off somewhere, taking a 1-2 week course and how to distribute the medicine and then come back and lead like these really big groups with 20 or 30 people, like every other weekend, or take people to South America and then have them do it every day for 5 days. And I think a lot gets lost in translation. I mean, traditionally, someone who was offering the medicine had, been training 10, 15, 20 years before they offered it. They themselves had taken it hundreds of times, so they know how it works in the body and the mind. And a lot of the people offering it that have crossed my path in the US don't have that level of experience. They haven't studied with somebody traditional who's passed it on. They haven't been taught the particular songs to sing, so I think that leaves room for trouble to happen. And with that said, any plant can be a plant medicine, even the weed outside plantain or dandelion. So when I say plant medicine, I'm talking about the common plants that we work with all the time. And those can be doorways and portals into learning about the self or learning about others or just learning about the plant kingdom. We don't necessarily need to take a hallucinogen. There are times when they're totally appropriate for people, but that's such a personal choice. But there are risks, and the medicines can be super seductive. They can take hold of people and not let go. And if you come back from it, you may not have the support structure set up to help you integrate. And so I've had people come back to me unable to work, unable to be a mom or father. They just can't hold their old role because so much got broken down. So there's a lot of places where it could be problematic for people, and then other places it can be, life-changing without a doubt, and it depends. And the person who's going to offer you ayahuasca, that's different than the person who may do MDMA therapy with you or do, microdosing psilocybin to get over fear of death. But the bigger medicines that take you out and on a journey for, 8 or 9 hours or a day or two definitely aren't for everybody. But I think it's people's personal, it's definitely a personal choice.
I really appreciate you having this conversation. And I love having this conversation, frankly, in general, because as somebody who's like a longtime meditator, I came to you after a state of doing a lot of work. And actually, I had tried mushrooms once before I'd come to see you. And although my experience doing mushrooms was like psilocybin was very eye-opening, it wasn't actually until a couple weeks later that I had this massive breakthrough. And then I came to you with essentially what felt like a struggle to kind of rebuild after all of these things crumbled down. And one of the things that I find, kind of as an observer that's like watching this wave is that there's something almost so ironic about it. Feels almost like a overconsumption in some cases and compulsion of mass consuming these plants, almost in the way that we are like mass consuming and destroying our planet in general to get these answers, right? And I want to have conversations that kind of don't just talk about the incredible benefits, which have been researched. And you spoke very well to now that there are so many incredible benefits and that the plant medicine itself isn't inherently harmful, but the way that we consume it is so important. And not just the way, but, they talk about set and setting. But I also think that more is not necessarily better, right? Like in the way that perhaps meditating more is a practice that is helpful in general. I don't know. I haven't noticed any negative side effects. Like being mindful of the fact that this is medicine is actually so, so, so important, right?
No, I agree 100%. And that's what I mean. So if I have somebody comes to me and they flew somewhere and they did Aya every day in a row for 9 days, I'm like, inside, I'm like, oh, like that's not how it's traditionally used. So I think setting intent, all of that goes into it, but also, is the spirit of the plant courting you? Is that something that you're feeling called to do? Or is it something that seems sexy and new and fun? And I just want to try it. Because as your experience shows you, the trip is one thing and it's the aftermath. It's what happens after, it's the integration. So you're basically telling, I don't know what, you're by doing these things, you're opening yourself up to like a deconstruction of self. And not everyone is prepared for that. And not everyone physically is prepared for that. Not everyone is emotionally or mentally prepared for that, And so if you travel somewhere and you do it and you come home, you don't have the container to hold you while you go through that. And Western culture doesn't know how to handle spiritual emergence, and a lot of what happens to people's pathologized and they can end up in a psych ward or on psychiatric medications, because there's just the culture lacks the understanding of what that means to deconstruct and rebuild. Where in tribal cultures, it's like it's a practice, like people go through that and they understand it. And not everyone needs to be opened up that wide. Some people just need a little bit of sliver of a door to open up to get shifts happening. Everyone's definitely different, but not every medicine is for every person either. And, it's not like every diet, like being vegetarian isn't for everybody. I mean, morally, maybe yes, but physically, some people actually need meat to be healthy. And so we don't want to shame people who need that to be healthy. So some people may need these medicines to be healthy. And I think that's great. And I'm glad that people have the option, but I think a lot of people lack respect going in and lack the understanding of what it means to actually take the medicines and what happens afterwards. And like you said, weeks after, sometimes it's months after, it works, it tumbles you. You're like being tumbled by the spirit of the plant.
That is so powerful. And I'm so, so, so happy to be speaking to that, because I think that the experience in and of itself is one thing, and the intention is another bit. But I think also the kind of historical and spiritual, I guess, association and foundation behind these medicines, it is so important to also be aware of that and kind of include that in the journey, right? As opposed to just the experience that it could give you. And I think that's just so powerful to speak to that, right? And what does that experience actually look like, right? You kind of described if you're working with a medicine human, I don't know if that's the right term. I don't want to say medicine man, medicine woman, medicine them, right? I don't know if there's a better term, but there's a kind of ritual and practice, and this has deep roots. And that is just, I think, so important to acknowledge as part of our connection to trying some of this, if you feel called.
Yeah. And to remember the plants have a spirit. I mean, the plants are sentient beings. All the plants, even the plants that, come across in our diet are sentient. There's a life force and they have a spirit. And when you're ingesting it, you're engaging with the spirit of that plant. You're taking something into you, and it's going to touch you. And it's the most intimate thing you can do, ingesting something. And I think that needs to be recognized as well. It's not like you're taking, and even medications, people think they're taking this benign Tylenol or this Advil or whatever, but even those medications have a chemical soul. There's a spirit in those medications. Everything is sentient. And I think we lose that, and that can present problems as well. and this isn't to, I want to say, scare anybody, we're just having this conversation and it's my experience of these things.
No, I think there's something beautiful about it. I think that including that perspective offers, at least for me, I feel a deeper connection to the things that I'm consuming, a level of respect and a level of honor that fundamentally, I think for me, and I can only speak from my experience since there are two of us on this call right now, but it at least allows me to feel more connected. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Kind of speaking of that sentient side, the deeper spiritual side, you are a deeply spiritual being living on a material plane. Welcome. In case you didn't know, well, now you know. Although I think, if anything, you're probably the first one to be educating us on that. I'm curious, how do you balance that, right? Like, at least for me, it can be so easy to get sucked into the device or, kind of focusing on the goal or, our material world is just a non-negotiable part of our life, like making a living, managing employees, like you have a thriving business, yet you also seem to balance that with being connected. And that is the core theme of this podcast. Like, how do you integrate the two in your life, whatever that looks like for you? CEO of Microsoft, founder of Gathering Time. Like, how do you do that on a practical level? If you can offer some wisdom there.
Yeah. So I think one is not denying humanness. And I think there's a spiritual trap where people deny their human level of experience. So for me, it's, everything informs how I am in the world. And then I also get to choose, like we all do, how we want to be in the world, how I want to walk in the world. Like what's important to me. And then, what do I want to offer back out? So, it's connection, definitely connection within, but it's not separating spiritual from material. It's seeing that they're one and the same. They're exactly the same. So for me, it's like mindful intent and bringing my, trying to be as present as possible in every moment. Sometimes I'm better at it than not, but I allow for myself to get off, I allow for those times when I get pulled off track because that's part of the human experience. And then I just come back to center and just coming from a place of gratitude for everything at all times has been a practice for me. And I know that can seem really woo-woo, but, just being in gratitude for whatever gets presented in front of me and just being grateful for it. And it's a little bit harder on some days than others, but I do strive for that most of the time. So, it's deciding how we want to live in the world, basically, but taking it all in and everything feeds itself. That makes sense.
It does. All right. I can keep chatting with you for hours, but we're coming up on time. So, Judy, where can people find you? Do you have anything exciting coming up that you would like to share with our audience? And I will link everything below. So don't worry about spelling and stuff like that.
No, thanks. So you can find me at Gathering Time in San Rafael. We're an herbal apothecary and we run by myself and my business partner, Cheryl, and can help you with anything in the world that you would need or want. So you can come see me there. You can also find my personal information on the website at Gathering Time if you want a session. I'm also teaching this fall at my shamanic herbalism class, which is phenomenal. I'm going to say that it is really great. And it goes for about September, October, and it meets weekly. And so we delve into, how to use herbs consciously, and we learn how to communicate with them on many different levels and how to work with them as medicines. So that's happening as well.
Beautiful. And I'll include everything in the show notes, folks, for you to check out. Judy, it was such a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review. 5-star reviews help the podcast grow, and I'm so grateful for that. I publish new episodes twice a month, so hit the subscribe button to be notified. And if you want to stay connected in between episodes, join my community on Instagram and TikTok at nourish_podcast. All right, that's all I got for you today. See you next time.